The chandeliers sparkled overhead like 1,000 tiny suns, casting golden light across the ballroom of Harrington House, where the cream of London society whirled and preened during the height of the season of 1815. Miss Eliza Thornfield stood motionless against the wall, her 26 years weighing heavily upon her as she clutched her empty dance card with fingers that had grown increasingly numb throughout the evening. Her dark blue gown, serviceable and plain compared to the pastel silks and satins adorning the younger debutantes, seemed to fade into the shadows, as though conspiring with fate to render her invisible. She had not expected invitations to dance, had long since resigned herself to her role as wallflower and observer, rather than participant in these elaborate social rituals, but even this practiced acceptance could not shield her from what came next. As she edged toward the refreshment table, seeking respite from her conspicuous solitude, Eliza found herself behind a pillar where Lord James Blackwood, the Earl of Westmoreland, stood in conversation with his fashionable companions. At 32, the Earl represented everything the ton valued. Handsome in that particular way of the aristocracy, confident to the point of arrogance, his fortune and lineage opening every door that remained firmly closed to women like Eliza, she would have slipped away unnoticed had Sir Reginald not spoken her name. Miss Thornfield might make a suitable mistress. Westmoreland, he suggested with a laugh that made Eliza freeze mid-step. She ought to be grateful for any attention, and surely she would be discreet given her circumstances. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity before Lord Blackwood responded with a dismissive snort. "Miss Thornfield? You jest? She is not even pretty enough to be a mistress. No fortune, no connections, and certainly no beauty to compensate." His companions laughed, the sound slicing through Eliza like physical blows as she stood transfixed, unable to retreat without revealing her presence. Her heart thundered in her chest, her cheeks burning with a humiliation so profound she feared she might be sick there on the polished marble floor. Around them, the ball continued its glittering progress, ladies twirling in their finery, gentlemen strutting with all the confidence of their privileged positions, the air thick with expensive perfume and the weight of social expectation. Eventually the men moved away, still chuckling at the absurdity of plain Miss Thornfield being worthy of even the most degraded form of male attention. Only then did Eliza draw a shuddering breath, straightening her spine through force of will alone. She had spent her life being overlooked, her intelligence dismissed, her worth measured and found wanting by a society that valued beauty and fortune above character and intellect. Yet somehow this particular cruelty cut deeper, perhaps because she had secretly admired Lord Blackwood from afar, foolishly imagining that a man reputed to be educated might see beyond the superficial. How wrong she had been. How utterly, devastatingly wrong. Rain pattered against the windows of Hollister and Sons booksellers, a humble establishment tucked away on a narrow street far from the fashionable districts of London, creating a soothing rhythm that matched the tranquil atmosphere inside, where the scent of leather bindings, paper, and dust mingled in the air 3 weeks after the Harrington ball. Eliza Thornfield had sought sanctuary among the crowded shelves, her fingers tracing reverently over the pages of a rare volume on botanical illustrations by the Swedish naturalist Linnaeus, temporarily forgetting the humiliation that had haunted her since overhearing Lord Blackwood's cruel dismissal. This small bookshop had long been her refuge, a place where her mind could roam free among ideas and knowledge that society deemed inappropriate for a woman of her station, but that Mr. Hollister, with his rheumy eyes and scholarly bent, had always encouraged her to explore. The peaceful silence was suddenly broken by the jingling of the shop bell and a gust of damp air as the door swung open, admitting a tall figure who shook rainwater from his greatcoat with an impatient gesture. Eliza glanced up briefly, then froze in recognition, her heart suddenly racing as Lord James Blackwood, Earl of Westmoreland himself, stepped into her sanctuary, his presence incongruous among the dusty tomes and simple surroundings. He seemed equally startled to find another patron in the shop, especially one occupying the corner dedicated to scientific works, but showed no sign of recognizing her as their eyes met briefly before she hurriedly looked down at her book again, praying he would not place her out of context. She listened to his footsteps approaching her section, her body tense with dread. Yet when he spoke, his voice held none of the dismissive arrogance she remembered from the ball. "I see you have discovered the Linnaeus," he remarked, gesturing toward her volume. His botanical classifications revolutionized natural science, though I find his illustrations less precise than those of his contemporaries. The comment was offered casually, clearly expecting an uninformed response, but years of private study rose to Eliza's defense. "Actually," she replied, her voice gaining strength as she ventured into familiar territory, while Ehret and Bauer may have produced more artistic renderings, Linnaeus captured structural details essential for proper classification, particularly in his studies of plant reproduction systems that many considered too controversial for public consumption. Lord Blackwood stared at her with undisguised surprise, then leaned closer to examine the page she had open. "You know Ehret and Bauer?" His tone held genuine interest rather than condescension, and Eliza found herself responding to his subsequent questions with increasing animation, her knowledge flowing freely as they discussed the merits of various botanical artists and the scientific principles behind their work. For nearly half an hour they conversed as equals in the world of ideas. Her usual reserve, forgotten as passion for her subject, overcame her social anxiety, her grey eyes bright with intelligence, her hands gesturing expressively to emphasize particular points about stamen structure and taxonomic categories. It was only when Mr. Place, Hollister coughed politely from behind his counter that reality intruded, and Eliza suddenly realized how improper their extended conversation would appear to society. In that same moment, she saw recognition dawn in Lord Blackwood's eyes, his expression shifting from intellectual engagement to shock as he finally placed her as the spinster he had so cruelly mocked. Murmuring a hasty excuse, Eliza gathered her shawl and fled into the rain, the shop bell jangling wildly in her wake, leaving behind not only the borrowed Linnaeus, but also her own leather-bound sketchbook filled with her careful botanical studies, the tangible evidence of the mind he had never bothered to discover until today. The fire crackled in the grate of Lord James Blackwood's study as midnight approached, casting dancing shadows across the elegant furnishings, while rain continued to lash against the windows of his London townhouse, an echo of the afternoon's downpour. A half-empty glass of brandy sat neglected on the mahogany desk before him as he carefully turned the pages of the leather-bound sketchbook he had retrieved from Hollister's shop, his initial curiosity giving way to genuine astonishment with each new illustration revealed. The botanical drawings were extraordinary, executed with a precision and artistic sensibility that rivaled or even surpassed many published works in his extensive library. Delicate lines captured the subtle venation of leaves, the complex structures of stamens and pistils, while notations in a small, neat hand detailed observations about habitat, growth patterns, and medicinal properties, revealing not just artistic skill but scientific understanding that could only come from years of dedicated study. When his valet entered to stoke the fire, James beckoned the man closer. "Roberts, what do you know of the Thornfield family circumstances?" he asked, still examining a particularly impressive rendering of an orchid species. The servant hesitated before responding cautiously. "They have fallen on difficult times since the late Mr. Thornfield lost his shipping investments, my lord. There are rumors that Miss Thornfield supports the household through anonymous scientific illustrations for several publications, though such work for a gentlewoman is kept quiet to preserve what remains of their social standing. Her mother is frequently ill, and there are 2 younger sisters yet to be established." James felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest as he recalled his callous words at the Harrington ball, now made infinitely worse by the evidence of Eliza's remarkable talent and the knowledge that she worked in secret to sustain her family. Eventually he retired to bed, the brandy having done nothing to ease his growing discomfort, but sleep brought no relief as he found himself dreaming vividly of Miss Thornfield, not as the plain, unremarkable wallflower he had so cruelly dismissed, but as the animated, passionate woman from the bookshop. In this dream she regarded him not with anger, but with quiet disappointment, her grey eyes seeing through all his pretensions of superiority to the shallow, judgmental core beneath his carefully cultivated exterior. No society beauty had ever wounded his pride with rejection as deeply as this dream. Eliza's silent assessment of his character, her gaze stripping away title, fortune, and social position to find him fundamentally wanting as a human being. He woke with a start as dawn light filtered through the curtains, his sheets twisted around him, her imagined disappointment still burning in his mind more powerfully than any real interaction in his experience. Ringing for Roberts, he requested his clothes be laid out immediately, his decision already made as he glanced at the sketchbook still on his bedside table. His reflection in the mirror, as he dressed, revealed uncharacteristic shadows beneath his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance betraying a night of troubled sleep, yet he barely noticed, his thoughts consumed with the necessity of returning Miss Thornfield's property and somehow making amends for his inexcusable behavior. As his carriage was prepared, James carefully wrapped the sketchbook in protective oilcloth against the continuing rain, his fingers lingering on the worn leather cover that represented not just extraordinary talent, but likely the financial salvation of an entire family. The man who descended the steps of his townhouse that morning was fundamentally changed from the one who had entered the bookshop the previous day, his former dismissive arrogance replaced by the uncomfortable knowledge of his grievous misjudgment and a strange, compelling need to see those grey eyes bright with intellectual passion once more. Thornfield Cottage sat on the unfashionable northern edge of London, where the city gradually surrendered to countryside, its modest stone facade partially obscured by climbing roses that suggested care rather than wealth. The small front garden meticulously tended, despite limited resources. Lord James Blackwood felt conspicuously out of place as he approached the gravel path in his fine carriage, aware of curtains twitching in neighbouring cottages, as the local residents observed the unusual spectacle of an aristocratic visitor in their humble surroundings. His arrival caused immediate commotion within the Thornfield household, the maid who answered his knock appearing so flustered at his title that she nearly forgot to take his card before hurrying away, leaving him standing awkwardly in the small but immaculate entryway, where he could hear the excited whispers of young female voices and a deeper, more suspicious male tone from the adjoining sitting room. When the maid returned, her message was clear if unexpected. Miss Thornfield was indisposed and unable to receive visitors at present. James felt a flicker of frustration at being denied after coming all this way, but before he could press his case, an older woman with the unmistakable remnants of beauty marked by illness appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on the arm of a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to Eliza. "Lord Blackwood," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I am Mrs. Thornfield. Please forgive my daughter's reluctance, but we would be honored if you would join us for tea." Her meaning was clear to anyone familiar with the desperate mathematics of genteel poverty and unmarried daughters. A connection to an earl, however tenuous or unexpected, was not to be squandered when two younger girls still needed advantageous matches. James followed her into a sitting room where the atmosphere of careful economy was evident in furniture that, while well-maintained, spoke of better days now past. Yet the room held a warmth and lived in comfort that his own grand, cold mansion conspicuously lacked. Mr. Thornfield, a thin, scholarly-looking man whose expression suggested he did not share his wife's social ambitions, acknowledged the Earl's presence with minimal courtesy before returning to his book, while the younger sisters, perhaps 16 and 18, made little effort to hide their curiosity. It was into this awkward tableau that Eliza finally entered, her reluctance evident in every line of her body, though her face remained composed as she offered a correct if chilly curtsy. James held out the oilcloth package, explaining how he had come into possession of her sketchbook, his carefully prepared apology sounding stilted even to his own ears as he attempted to express regret for his behavior without explicitly referencing words that would shock her family if repeated. Eliza accepted the sketchbook with steady hands, her grey eyes meeting his directly without the deference he was accustomed to receiving. "Your good opinion once lost is lost forever, Lord Blackwood. Fortunately for me, I never valued it to begin with," she stated, her quiet dignity more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. Despite Mrs. Thornfield's horrified gasp, and subsequent apologies for her daughter's impertinence, James found himself unable to take offense, recognizing in Eliza's response not merely wounded pride, but the justifiable reaction of a woman whose true worth had been carelessly, cruelly dismissed. He departed shortly afterward, the polite conversation having yielded nothing beyond surface pleasantries. Yet, as his carriage pulled away from Thornfield Cottage, he found himself haunted, not by Eliza's rejection, but by the tableau he had witnessed. Despite their reduced circumstances, the Thornfield family shared genuine affection and purpose, the small sitting room containing more authentic human connection than all the grand ballrooms and drawing rooms of his social circle combined, leaving him with the uncomfortable awareness that for all his wealth and position, his own life was comparatively empty of such meaningful bonds. The exhibition hall of the Royal Botanical Society gleamed with morning light streaming through high windows, illuminating glass cases containing the finest scientific illustrations from across the empire, the air buzzing with scholarly conversation as the scientific community of London gathered to celebrate achievements typically hidden from fashionable society. Lord James Blackwood moved through the crowd with practiced ease, acknowledging acquaintances with polite nods, while his attention remained focused on examining the displayed works, his interest genuine rather than affected like many aristocratic patrons who attended such events, merely to be seen supporting intellectual pursuits. He paused before a series of orchid illustrations bearing the name E.T. Blackwell, the precision of the renderings immediately familiar, causing his breath to catch as he recognized the same delicate hand that had created the drawings in Eliza's sketchbook. Though the masculine pseudonym effectively concealed her identity from the botanical community, who praised the work effusively, a white-haired professor standing nearby commented to his colleague on the extraordinary anatomical accuracy of Blackwell's depictions of stamen structures, declaring them superior to any other scientific illustrator currently published in England, the two men debating whether the mysterious Blackwell must have studied in Germany or perhaps trained under the great botanical masters at Kew. James felt a curious mixture of pride and indignation on Eliza's behalf, pride in her evident mastery that earned such praise from eminent scholars, and indignation that she could not openly claim credit for work that surpassed that of her male counterparts. His gaze swept the room, searching for her among the gathered scientists and patrons, finally discovering her partially concealed behind a pillar, dressed modestly in a green gown that helped her blend into the background, her expression a complex blend of satisfaction and resignation, as she listened to her work being discussed without the ability to join the conversation. Their eyes met across the crowded exhibition hall in a moment of electric recognition, her initial surprise giving way to wariness as he inclined his head in silent acknowledgement of her achievement, a gesture she returned with the barest hint of a nod before turning away, clearly uncomfortable with his awareness of her presence. As James continued to watch her, his unusual attention to an unremarkable spinster did not go unnoticed by the society matrons who had accompanied their scientific husbands to the exhibition, whispers beginning almost immediately behind raised fans, speculating on what could possibly draw the Earl of Westmoreland's interest to plain Miss Thornfield. The whispers crescendoed with the arrival of Lady Caroline Harcourt, whose family had made their expectations regarding an alliance with the Blackwood title abundantly clear during the past 2 seasons. Resplendent in pale blue silk that emphasized her acclaimed beauty, Lady Caroline surveyed the room with the confidence of a woman accustomed to commanding male attention, her expression souring visibly when she observed James studying Eliza's retreating figure with evident interest rather than hurrying to her side as social convention dictated. Before James could extricate himself from conversation with a particularly tenacious botanist, Lady Caroline had crossed the exhibition hall to claim his arm possessively, her voice carrying just loudly enough to ensure those nearby would hear. "Darling, you must tell me what could possibly fascinate you about those dreary scientific drawings, or perhaps it was the equally dreary Miss Thornfield who caught your attention." The deliberate cruelty of the comment, designed to reassert her social dominance, instead strengthened James' growing realization of how profoundly he had misjudged the woman whose work now received accolades from the scientific community while she remained in the shadows. Unable to claim her rightful recognition in a world that valued her mind, but would dismiss her for her gender and appearance. The contrast between Eliza's genuine accomplishment and Lady Caroline's shallow social maneuvering had never been clearer, yet as he observed the calculating gleam in his intended match eye, he understood that external pressures would not easily be overcome. The whispers already spreading through society that Lord Blackwood had developed a peculiar interest in the plain, aging spinster with unusual scientific leanings. The Duchess of Hertford's garden party unfolded beneath a perfect early summer sky. The sprawling grounds of Hertford House, transformed into a paradise of flowering shrubs and immaculate lawns, where the elite of London society mingled among nature, tamed to showcase aristocratic taste and wealth. Birds sang from ornamental trees as ladies in pastel silks and gentlemen in summer weight frock coats strolled along gravel paths, their conversations creating a gentle hum beneath the music of a string quartet positioned on the terrace. Lord James Blackwood arrived fashionably late, his entrance noted by the usual flutter of feminine attention, though his gaze swept the assembled guests with purpose rather than the bored indifference he typically affected at such gatherings. He located Eliza Thornfield, standing apart from the main group, examining the Duchess' prized rose garden with evident botanical interest, her simple cream muslin gown and straw bonnet making her nearly invisible among the more elaborately dressed attendees. Moving deliberately in her direction, he navigated around several attempted interceptions by eager mammas with eligible daughters until he reached Eliza's side among the fragrant blooms, positioned strategically away from prying eyes and straining ears. "Miss Thornfield," he greeted her with a formal bow that belied the intensity of his gaze. "I had hoped to find you here." Eliza acknowledged him with cool politeness, her gloved fingers brushing a pale pink rose as if drawing strength from the contact. "Lord Blackwood, I admit I am surprised by your continued attention, given your previously stated assessment of my appeal." James winced at the reference to his cruel words, but pressed on with the speech he had rehearsed during sleepless nights. "I know you are E.T. Blackwell," he stated quietly, watching her eyes widen in alarm. "Your work at the Royal Botanical Society exhibition shows extraordinary talent deserving of recognition under your true name. I wish to offer my patronage, Miss Thornfield, to enable you to claim the acclaim rightfully yours without risking your family's security or social standing." Eliza stared at him, her initial shock giving way to a complexity of emotions he could not fully decipher. "I require neither your charity nor your protection, Lord Blackwood," she finally responded, though her voice held less frost than before. "My arrangement with the scientific journals suits my purposes adequately, but it denies you proper credit for work that surpasses that of your male colleagues," he countered, his frustration evident. "I have heard Kew Gardens botanists claim your illustrations of orchid structures have advanced their understanding more than any publication in the past decade." He watched color rise in her cheeks at the praise, a glimpse of the passionate scholar from the bookshop momentarily visible beneath her guarded exterior, before their conversation was deliberately interrupted by Lady Caroline Harcourt, resplendent in coral pink that emphasized her fashionable blonde beauty. "James, darling, the Duchess is asking for you," she announced, ignoring Eliza completely as she placed a proprietary hand on his arm. "You simply must tell her about your hunting plans for the autumn." Her arrival effectively ended their private discussion, forcing James to make polite excuses as he was drawn away by Lady Caroline's determined maneuvering, though he noted with interest that Eliza did not immediately return to the main gathering, but instead disappeared into a secluded section of the rose garden, accessible through a yew archway. His conversation with the Duchess completed as quickly as courtesy allowed, James searched for Eliza once more, eventually following the same path through the yew arch, only to find himself blocked from view of the main garden, but within earshot of Lady Caroline speaking to her circle of fashionable friends. "Really, darling, your charity project is hardly worth the gossip," she was saying with a laugh that contained no genuine humor. "Plain Miss Thornfield may draw plants adequately, but surely not enough to justify becoming a social liability. Even charity cases must meet certain standards of presentation." A movement among the roses revealed Eliza's presence just beyond the group, her face carefully composed, though her eyes betrayed the hurt beneath her dignity. Before she could retreat, James stepped forward deliberately, his expression harder than anyone in society had ever witnessed. "Lady Caroline," he stated in a voice that carried to nearby guests, "I find I must correct your misconception. Miss Thornfield's scientific illustrations demonstrate a precision and artistry that commands respect from the foremost botanical experts in Europe. Unlike certain ornamental blooms that contribute nothing but decorative value to a garden, her work serves the advancement of human knowledge." The gathering fell silent at this unmistakable rebuke, Lady Caroline's face flushing an unbecoming red as she realized not only that she had been overheard, but that Lord Blackwood had publicly chosen to defend the spinster over maintaining social harmony with his expected match. James offered his arm to a visibly stunned Eliza, deliberately guiding her back toward the main party, with a protective attentiveness that announced to all observers that his interest was neither charitable nor casual, but born of genuine respect, a turning point that would send ripples through London society and change both their lives irrevocably. Blackwood Manor rose from the rolling countryside like a physical manifestation of centuries of aristocratic privilege, its grey stone walls and soaring windows surveying the surrounding parkland with dignified permanence. As midsummer sunshine bathed the formal, dawn light spilled through the glass panes of Blackwood Manor's enormous greenhouse, transforming dewdrops on exotic leaves into countless tiny prisms while casting long shadows across the flagstone paths where Eliza Thornfield and Lord James Blackwood bent over a particularly rare orchid specimen he had acquired from South America. The extensive gardens and botanical collection that surrounded the ancestral home revealed another side of the Earl that few in society acknowledged, his genuine passion for scientific horticulture evident in the carefully maintained specimens gathered from across the British Empire. Professor Whitfield, the renowned botanist from Kew Gardens whom James had specially invited to view Eliza's work, moved slowly along the adjacent table where her portfolio lay open, his magnifying glass hovering over the detailed illustrations as he occasionally murmured in appreciation. For the past 2 hours, Eliza and James had worked together in comfortable synchronicity, their shared knowledge creating a harmony of purpose as they catalogued and sketched the rarest specimens in the collection, their intellectual connection deepening with each scholarly exchange that required no artifice or social pretense. "I believe this may be a previously undocumented variation," Eliza observed, comparing the unusual purple striations on a tropical bloom to her reference materials. "The veining pattern differs significantly from established classifications." James leaned closer to examine the detail she indicated, his shoulder nearly touching hers in a proximity that would have caused scandal in any drawing room, but seemed perfectly natural in this context of scientific inquiry. "You have a remarkable eye for taxonomic anomalies, Miss Thornfield," he replied, his admiration evident. Their collaborative examination was interrupted by the sharp tap of a walking stick against stone as the Dowager Countess of Westmoreland entered the greenhouse, her imperious gaze taking in the scene with evident disapproval. The elderly woman had arrived unexpectedly at the manor the previous evening, her presence casting a pall over the house party when she discovered the Thornfield family's inclusion among the guests. Drawing herself to her full height, the Countess addressed Eliza with barely concealed contempt. "Miss Thornfield, I believe your family must be wondering at your absence. Perhaps scientific pursuits might be set aside for more appropriate feminine occupations." James straightened immediately, tension evident in his stance, but before he could speak, Eliza responded with calm dignity. "Your greenhouse collection is truly exceptional, Lady Westmoreland. This Cattleya variety you have nurtured demonstrates remarkable adaptation to English conditions, indicating skillful cultivation." The Countess blinked in surprise at this unexpected response, as Eliza continued, moving to a nearby specimen. "And this rare dendrobium must have required particular attention to humidity and light. The fertilization method appears quite successful." Turning slowly, Eliza pointed out several other specimens, correctly identifying their origins and particular requirements with the confidence of genuine expertise, her knowledge transforming what had been intended as a dismissal into an unexpected botanical consultation. James watched the exchange with growing admiration, observing how Eliza's quiet competence gradually softened his mother's rigid posture, the older woman's grudging respect evident when she eventually began asking specific questions about certain struggling plants in her personal collection. Professor Whitfield interrupted their conversation by approaching with Eliza's portfolio clutched reverently in his hands. "Miss Thornfield, your illustrations surpass anything I have encountered in recent publications. The Royal Society is organizing an expedition to the Amazon basin next spring to document undiscovered flora. We require a scientific illustrator of the highest caliber. I should like to formally offer you this position." Eliza froze, her face reflecting stunned disbelief at being offered what would undoubtedly be the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance for legitimate recognition in the scientific community and exposure to botanical specimens few Europeans had ever documented. James watched conflicting emotions cross her face as the implications became clear. Such an expedition would mean leaving England for at least a year, abandoning her family responsibilities, and stepping entirely beyond the boundaries of conventional feminine behavior. Yet her momentary glance toward him revealed something beyond practical considerations, a personal conflict that mirrored his own growing realization that her departure, while advancing her scientific career, would mean separation from the woman whose mind and character had increasingly captivated him despite every societal expectation to the contrary. Candelabra blazed like miniature constellations against the midnight blue sky visible through the high windows of Blackwood Manor's grand ballroom, the culminating event of the house party unfolding in a whirl of silks, jewels, and carefully calibrated social maneuvers as the assembled elite of London society performed their intricate dance of status and connection. Eliza Thornfield stood momentarily unnoticed near the entrance, her transformation causing several guests to look twice before recognition dawned, for the woman who had arrived wearing modest, serviceable gowns now appeared in shimmering emerald silk that James had sent to her room with a simple note, acknowledging her contribution to the botanical catalogue. The rich colour highlighted the clear grey-green of her eyes and brought a luminescence to her complexion that had never been apparent in the pastel shades considered appropriate for unmarried ladies of a certain age, while her chestnut hair, arranged more elaborately than her usual severe style, softened her features and revealed a quiet beauty previously overlooked. Whispers rippled through the assembly when Lord Blackwood immediately crossed the room to greet her, his expression warming visibly in a way that the most accomplished society beauties had failed to inspire, but speculation turned to open scandal when he led her onto the floor for the first waltz, his hand resting with unmistakable familiarity at her waist. Lady Caroline Harcourt, who had assumed her position as the event's de facto hostess, despite receiving no such authority from James, watched this development with calculating fury, her usual perfect composure slipping as the evening progressed, and Lord Blackwood claimed Eliza for a second dance, flagrantly violating the protocol that prevented gentlemen from showing particular attention to any one lady. By the time the supper dance was announced, Lady Caroline had gathered a circle of sympathetic allies around her, their heads bent together as they conferred in hushed tones that promised nothing good for the recipient of their collective displeasure. Eliza, flushed from dancing and momentarily alone as James was detained by conversation with an elderly peer, found herself suddenly surrounded by Lady Caroline and her cohort, their artificial smiles failing to disguise the malice beneath. "My dear Miss Thornfield," Lady Caroline announced in a carrying voice clearly intended to attract maximum attention, "how clever of you to secure patronage through your little plant drawings. I understand many women in reduced circumstances must resort to trade to support themselves, though usually such common employment is kept discreetly hidden rather than flaunted at a gathering of quality." The deliberate cruelty silenced nearby conversations as guests turned to witness Eliza's humiliation, her work as an illustrator now exposed not as scientific contribution, but as shameful necessity, the implied connection between Lord Blackwood's interest and her financial vulnerability casting the darkest possible light on their association. Before Eliza could respond, James appeared at her side, his expression transformed by a cold fury that few had ever witnessed in the normally controlled Earl. "Miss Thornfield has contributed more to scientific knowledge than anyone in this room," he stated, his voice carrying effortlessly through the now silent ballroom. I would sooner trust her judgment than that of the entire peerage. His gaze swept the assembly, challenging anyone to contradict him, before returning to Lady Caroline with unmistakable contempt. As for patronage, I consider myself fortunate that she allows me to support work that will be studied by scholars long after our petty social distinctions have been forgotten. The collective gasp that followed this declaration signified the complete rupture of social expectations, Lord Blackwood's defence going far beyond courtesy into territory that implied personal investment of the most serious kind. Eliza stood straight beside him, her dignity intact despite the public attack. But when she spoke, her words fell like stones into the expectant silence. "I am grateful for your defence, Lord Blackwood, but Lady Caroline is correct that I have worked to support my family, and I shall continue to do so by accepting Professor Whitfield's offer to join the Amazon expedition." Her announcement struck James with visible force, the realization that she would travel to the other side of the world, clearly having never occurred to him despite his encouragement of her scientific recognition. For a moment his carefully maintained aristocratic mask slipped entirely, revealing a depth of feeling that shocked the observing crowd almost as much as his previous defense had done, the raw emotion in his expression making it abundantly clear that Lord Blackwood's interest in the plain spinster had progressed far beyond mere patronage or intellectual admiration. As the music resumed and the crowd gradually returned to their interrupted revelry, James and Eliza remained locked in silent communication, each finally confronting the truth that had been building between them, recognition that despite every barrier of society, circumstance, and now geography, something profound and unexpected had developed, that neither had anticipated nor sought, but which now demanded acknowledgement before it might be lost forever. Morning fog clung to the Thames like ghostly fingers, gradually yielding to autumn sunshine that glinted on the water as gulls circled above the bustling docks where the expedition ship Aventine prepared for departure to South America. Eliza Thornfield stood on the quayside, her practical travelling costume and sensible boots marking her transition from society spinster to scientific explorer, while her family gathered around her in a mixture of pride and concern. Her mother's tears and her father's stoic encouragement reflected the extraordinary nature of her undertaking, a gentlewoman venturing across oceans to document unknown flora in service of scientific advancement, her trunk already loaded with specialized papers, pigments, and the tools of her art. Professor Whitfield supervised the loading of scientific equipment nearby, occasionally consulting with Eliza on the proper storage of delicate instruments, while sailors called to one another above the general commotion of the harbor, the atmosphere charged with anticipation and the promise of discovery. Despite her outward composure, Eliza felt conflicted emotions warring within her breast. Genuine excitement for the opportunity before her, tempered by an unexpected regret that tightened her throat whenever she thought of leaving England, or more specifically, leaving without a final farewell from Lord Blackwood. After the tumultuous conclusion of the midsummer ball, their interactions had been limited to formal, public exchanges, the unspoken understanding between them carefully contained within the boundaries of propriety. Despite the dreams that continued to haunt her sleeping hours, the final boarding call sounded, prompting tearful embraces and promises to write as often as possible, her younger sisters extracting solemn vows that she would document any handsome foreign gentleman encountered along with the exotic plants. As Eliza prepared to ascend the gangplank, a commotion at the dock entrance caught her attention, a fine carriage bearing the Blackwood crest arriving at dangerous speed before disgorging the Earl himself, who moved through the crowd with uncharacteristic disregard for dignity or protocol. James reached her side just as she was about to board, slightly breathless and uncharacteristically disheveled, his expression intense with emotion typically hidden beneath aristocratic reserve. "I feared I would miss you," he said, holding out a package wrapped in fine leather. "This is not a farewell gift, but a beginning." Eliza unwrapped it with trembling fingers to reveal a beautifully bound botanical journal opening to the title page that proclaimed Amazonian Flora with illustrations by Miss Eliza Thornfield. "My name," she whispered, looking up at him in wonder. "Not a pseudonym." I have used what influence I possess to ensure your work will be recognized under your true identity, he explained, his voice low and urgent with the awareness of little time remaining. The Royal Society has agreed to publish your findings with full attribution upon your return. His hands gently closed over hers around the journal. Eliza, I once cruelly claimed you were not pretty enough to be desired. Now I find you are too extraordinary to be forgotten. I dream of you still, but no dream compares to your reality. The raw honesty in his declaration robbed her of speech momentarily, the journey from mockery to this profound reversal too overwhelming to process with the ship's bell signaling imminent departure. When she found her voice, it emerged stronger than she had expected. I have arranged with Professor Whitfield to send correspondence throughout our journey, she said, her eyes never leaving his face. The expedition is for 1 year, Lord Blackwood. He stepped closer, propriety forgotten as his hand lightly touched her cheek. I will wait, Eliza, and use that time to begin reforming the society that would judge us both so harshly. When you return, should you wish it, there will be a place for you not just in the scientific community, but wherever you choose, including by my side. His meaning could not have been clearer had he made a formal declaration, the implied promise hanging between them as the final boarding call echoed across the dock. With a courage born of newfound confidence, Eliza reached for his hand and pressed a small sealed envelope into it. My own dreams, for when I am gone, she whispered, then turned and ascended the gangplank with steady steps, not looking back until she reached the deck. From the ship's rail, she watched James standing motionless on the quayside, his tall figure remaining in place as the vessel slowly pulled away from the dock, gradually diminishing with distance yet remaining fixed in her vision until the ship's turn took her around a bend in the river. Later, as London faded into the distance and the Aventine made its way toward open sea, Eliza found a sheltered spot on deck, away from the curious eyes of sailors and fellow scientists. Opening her sketchbook to a fresh page, she began to draw not the expected botanical specimen but from memory the features of Lord Blackwood's face, capturing the intensity of his gaze and the curve of his smile, with the same precision she brought to her scientific illustrations. The portrait emerging beneath her skilled fingers reflected not just his physical appearance, but the essence she had come to know beyond the aristocratic facade, the genuine passion for knowledge, the unexpected humility in acknowledging his errors, the capacity for growth that had transformed mockery into profound respect and eventually into love. She had once believed dreams could never become reality, yet her present circumstances defied all previous limitations. From her position as respected scientific illustrator to the inconceivable truth that the Earl of Westmoreland now dreamed of her as she dreamed of him. As the ship sailed toward distant horizons and discoveries yet unknown, Eliza traced the final lines of her drawing, inscribing beneath it words meant only for herself. Sometimes the cruelest mockery leads to the most unexpected joy. The thought sustained her as England disappeared behind her, not an ending but rather the beginning of a journey that would bring her back, not as the overlooked spinster she had been, but as the woman she had discovered herself to be, worthy of scientific recognition, personal fulfillment, and a love that had transcended every boundary society had erected between them.